Welcome back, deep divers. Today we're going deep on something really strange. The mass bird death in Beebe, Arkansas on New Year's Eve 2010. You've probably heard bits and pieces about it, birds falling out of the sky, doomsday theories. But we're going way beyond the headlines with this one. We've got scientific reports, firsthand accounts, and even radar data to try and figure out what happened that night.
It's a story that just grabs you, doesn't it? Thousands of birds just dropping from the sky right on New Year's Eve. It's almost like, I don't know, something out of a prophecy or a horror movie.
Right. So paint the picture for us, Beebe.
Hmm.
Arkansas, small town. People are gearing up to ring in the new year. And then what?
Well, just before midnight, people in the Windwood neighborhood started hearing this strange sound, a loud whoosh, almost like a big gust of wind, and then they saw it. Birds. Thousands of them just plummeting from the sky.
Thousands. What kind of birds are we talking about here?
Mostly red-winged blackbirds and European starlings. Can you imagine waking up on New Year's Day and your lawn, your street, your whole neighborhood just covered in dead birds? It was a pretty shocking sight.
I can only imagine. So what was the immediate reaction from the community?
Fear, confusion, and a whole lot of speculation. People were naturally concerned about what had caused this. Was it some kind of environmental disaster, a disease? Was the air toxic?
I bet the canary in the coal mine analogy came up a lot.
Absolutely. People were worried about what this meant for the town, for the environment, even for themselves. The incident blew up nationally pretty quickly, and the media just swarmed Beebe, just fueling the public's curiosity and anxiety.
So with all this panic and speculation, what did the authorities do to get to the bottom of it?
The Arkansas Game and Fish Commission, along with a bunch of different labs, they launched a full-on investigation. They collected a bunch of bird carcasses for necropsies, which are basically animal autopsies, and started analyzing radar data to see if they could track the birds' movements before they fell.
Necropsies and radar data. Sounds like they were pulling out all the stops to get some answers.
They were, and what they found was both revealing and kind of perplexing.
Okay, you've got me on the edge of my seat here. What did the necropsies reveal?
The cause of death was blunt force trauma. The birds weren't sick, they weren't poisoned. They died from impact injuries. Basically, they collided with something, trees, buildings, power lines, maybe even each other, in their panicked flight.
So they weren't just flying blind, but something made them crash into things.
Exactly. And this is where the fireworks theory comes in. It was New Year's Eve, a lot of people were setting off fireworks. And the main theory is that all that noise startled the birds and caused them to take flight in a huge panic.
That makes sense. But how could fireworks cause so many birds to die? Don't birds fly away from loud noises all the time?
They do, but here's the thing. Blackbirds, well, they have really bad night vision. They don't usually fly after dark. So picture these birds, already disoriented by the dark, suddenly jolted awake by these booming explosions. It would be pure chaos.
So basically, they're flying blind in a panic. But wouldn't they scatter in all different directions? Why did so many of them crash in such a concentrated area?
That's one of the most puzzling parts. The radar data showed that this massive flock, an estimated 1.6 million birds, took off from their roost right before midnight. It looks like the fireworks might have triggered this mass exodus. And with their limited vision, they just couldn't navigate in the dark and ended up colliding with anything and everything in their path.
Wow, 1.6 million birds. That's a crazy number.
Yeah.
But how did the radar know it was those birds? And did all the birds in the roost take off all at once?
That's a good question. The radar couldn't actually identify specific birds, but it could track the movements of large groups. And based on the timing and location of what the radar picked up, scientists think it's very likely that the birds that fell in Beebe were part of this massive flock that took off from a nearby roost. It's possible that not all 1.6 million birds flew off at the exact same time, but the sheer size of this exodus would have created a really chaotic and disorienting situation for the birds.
So while fireworks seem to be the likely culprit that set off this mass panic flight, there's still some pieces of the puzzle that just don't quite fit.
Exactly. And just to add another layer of mystery to this whole thing, there were also reports of mass fish deaths in the Arkansas River around the same time.
Hold on, fish too. Now things are getting really weird. What's the connection between the birds and the fish? Were they affected by the fireworks too?
That's what investigators were trying to figure out. The fish deaths were in a totally different spot, and it's not clear if there's any direct connection to the bird deaths at all. Some experts thought it could just be a coincidence, while others suggested that maybe some environmental factor played a role in both events.
So we've got these two strange and seemingly unconnected events happening right around the same time, It's no wonder people's imaginations started running wild. What other explanations were people coming up with besides fireworks?
Oh, you name it. Biblical end times, UFOs, government experiments, secret chemical spills. The internet was just buzzing with all sorts of conspiracy theories.
People do love a good mystery, especially one with those apocalyptic vibes. It seems like the Beebe bird deaths tapped into this primal fear we have about nature turning against us.
Absolutely. And it's interesting how this whole incident seemed to play into those cultural anxieties we have about birds being omens of disaster. Like in Hitchcock's The Birds or even Edgar Allan Poe's The Raven.
Right. Those images of birds swarming and attacking are seriously unsettling. So it's straight out of a nightmare.
What's bird?
But in the case of Beebe, it seems like the birds were the victims, not the aggressors.
Exactly. But that doesn't make the event any less mysterious or disturbing. And it raises the question, if it wasn't some evil force or a deliberate attack, what did cause this mass bird death?
That's a question that scientists and investigators were really struggling with. And as they dug deeper into the evidence, they found even more strange and unsettling details that challenged the simple explanation of fireworks. But this mystery wasn't over yet. A year later, Beebe would experience another unsettling New Year's Eve.
As we were saying, a year later, almost to the day, Beebe found itself right back in the middle of another bird death mystery. It was like a scene straight out of Groundhog Day, but, with a much darker twist.
Are you serious? More birds falling from the sky. What happened this time?
So on January 1st, 2012, people in Beebe woke up to dozens of dead blackbirds all over town. It wasn't as big as the 2010 event, but it was still enough to freak everyone out.
I can only imagine that feeling of dread that must have swept through the town. It's like whatever caused the first one came back, almost like it was taunting them.
Exactly. It brought back all the fears and anxieties from the year before. People were wondering, is this going to happen every New Year's Eve now? What's next?
So what did investigators find this time? Was it the same cause of death, blunt force trauma?
Yep. The necropsies again showed blunt force trauma as the cause of death. No signs of disease, no poisoning. The birds had died from impacts.
So fireworks again. But I thought you said people were trying to cut back on fireworks after the first incident.
They were. The town was much more aware of the risk to the birds, and a lot of people chose not to use fireworks that year, but obviously some people were still setting them off.
Okay, so maybe there were just enough fireworks to startle a smaller group of birds this time? But it's still really weird that it happened almost exactly a year after the first one.
That's what makes this second event so puzzling. Remember how we talked about blackbirds being creatures of habit? They go back to the same roosting spots year after year?
Right, you said they were locals?
Exactly. So if fireworks were the only cause, you'd think the birds would learn to stay away from that area after what happened the first time.
Yeah, so either they didn't learn or something else was making them panic. But what?
That's the big question. Some experts have said that weather might have played a part, like sudden changes in air pressure or strong winds could have disoriented the birds and made them more likely to crash.
Okay, I can see how a sudden downdraft or really strong winds could make birds lose control and crash. But was there any evidence of weird weather around the time of the second incident?
That's where things get a little fuzzy. Some people said they heard thunder that night, but there's no official record of any bad weather in Beebe on January 1st, 2012.
Interesting. So we have fireworks, which don't totally explain the second event.
Yeah.
And we have the possibility of weather, but there's no real proof of that either. It feels like we're still missing something here.
We are, and that's what makes this whole story so fascinating, so creepy. We have the scientific explanation, blunt force trauma, but we still don't know exactly what triggered these mass bird deaths. Was it fireworks, or was there something else going on? Something we haven't even thought of yet.
Something we can't explain with what we know about bird behavior or environmental stuff.
Maybe. And that's what I find so interesting about these kinds of events. They remind us that even with all our scientific progress, there are still mysteries out there in the natural world that we may never fully understand.
Just kind of humbling, isn't it? We think we have it all figured out, and then something like this happens and throws everything into question. Makes you wonder what other seemingly explained events might actually have hidden depths.
Absolutely. And that's a good question to think about. But for now, let's switch gears and talk about the human side of all this. How did the people in Beebe cope with these strange and unsettling events? Did life just go back to normal?
Yeah, it must have been a crazy experience for the folks in Beebe. You mentioned before how they reacted with fear and speculation, but how did they actually deal with the aftermath of all those bird deaths? Did things just go back to normal?
It's a really interesting question, isn't it? Because, how do you just go back to normal after something like that? I mean, just think about it. Living in a town where thousands of birds just suddenly drop out of the sky not once but twice, That's got to leave some kind of mark on the community.
Oh, absolutely. I can
Yeah.
only imagine. It would be like living in some real-life Twilight Zone episode.
Yeah.
So how did the people in Beebe process all of this?
Well, you'd think something this weird would make people kind of pull away from each other, but it seems like it actually did the opposite. The community really rallied together. They all shared this experience of shock and confusion, but there was also this sense of, resilience.
So in a way, this strange and kind of creepy event actually brought people closer.
It seems that way,
Yeah.
yeah. There are stories of people helping each other clean up all the dead birds, sharing their own theories about what happened, and even, finding some humor in the whole thing.
Humor. Really? What kind of humor?
Well, some folks were joking about, the birds having a New Year's Eve party that got out of hand,
Yeah.
or about the town being cursed by like a flock of angry blackbirds. It was their way of dealing with how absurd the whole thing was, finding a little bit of light in all the darkness.
I get it. Sometimes humor is the best way to handle stuff we just can't explain or control.
Mm.
Did the whole experience change anything in Beebe, though? Like, did people become more cautious about fireworks, for instance?
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
There was a much bigger awareness of how fireworks could affect wildlife.
Yeah.
Some people decided not to use fireworks the next year, and there were even talks about making the rules about fireworks stricter.
It's a good reminder that even something that seems as harmless as fireworks can have these unintended and sometimes, tragic consequences.
Exactly. And, I think what happened in Beebe was also kind of a wake-up call for all of us about how we interact with nature.
Mm.
Here's this small town that suddenly becomes this big news story because of this bizarre and unsettling event that no one can really explain. It made people think about the mysteries of the natural world and question how we're impacting this delicate balance of the ecosystem.
And it seems like even with all our scientific knowledge and all the tools we have to investigate, we're still left with way more questions than answers.
That's right. We can analyze all the evidence and come up with theories, but in the end, there's this element of the unknown that we may never fully understand. And maybe that's part of what makes this story so captivating. It reminds us that the world is a strange and mysterious place full of wonders and terrors that we're only just starting to figure out.
So the BB bird deaths are still an enigma, a chilling reminder that even in the 21st century, there are events that just defy our understanding. It seems like the most likely cause is fireworks, but the fact that it happened again, the sheer number of birds involved, and the lack of a clear explanation for that second incident, well, it leaves us with these lingering questions and a real sense of unease.
What's really fascinating is that this event, even though it was tragic, it also sparked a conversation. It got people talking about how we relate to nature, about the unexpected consequences of our actions, and about the limits of what we know. It's a story that sticks with us, reminding us that even when faced with mystery and uncertainty, there's an opportunity to learn to reflect and to gain a deeper appreciation for this intricate web of life that connects us all.
That's a powerful thought to end on. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive today. It's been a truly thought-provoking exploration of a truly bizarre event. Until next time, stay curious and maybe keep an eye on the sky on New Year's Eve. You never know what might be falling from it.